regular meeting of the Maple Run Unified Board of Directors to order at 6:05. Today is 7 November 2018. We're meeting at the Northwest Technical Center. We have all 10 of our directors present, representing 9 votes. Start with the agenda review. I have one change to the agenda. I would like to delete item 9C, Administrators Reports. Anyone else on the board have any additions or changes to the agenda? Okay, look for a motion to approve as amended then.
So moved.
Thank you, Nina. Any discussion on the agenda? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 9-0. I'd ask everyone to please rise for the pledge. Back here. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you and welcome everyone. Next item on our agenda is visitors. Are there any visitors here who would like to give testimony to the board tonight? Going, gone. Okay, then turn it over to item 5, which is presentation. Leanne, would you take it from here?
Yes, I certainly will. I'd like to welcome all of you to Northwest Technical Center. Typically, there isn't as many people in the room for a board meeting, but we take the opportunity to blend our board meeting and our advisory committee meeting. So it's a state regulation to have 2 meetings a year. These folks take and volunteer their time to counsel our instructors on equipment and curriculum and what's needed in the industry. So we, again, took the opportunity to have this all together. It's good for you to see business and industry. These are the people that are in the trenches with our students. They take our students for work-based learning, for job shadows, and we really appreciate all of the support that you give the Northwest Technical Center. I don't want to be long-winded because we have a presentation from Matt Barowitz, who is Chief Economic and Labor Market Information Division from the Market Division. And he's going to talk to us about economic trends in Vermont and also specific to Franklin County. And he's going to touch on Chittenden County as well because we send a lot of our students to Chittenden County. So just a little bit of process. I expect this to go about 30 minutes or so. If the question and answer goes a little bit longer, please know that these folks need to carry on their meeting, so I'm going to give you permission to make your way out, and I trust that you're going to hear some information from Matthew that will spark some good conversation in your meetings. So thank you for that. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me. Certainly jam them in tight. This is great. This is great. I'm Matt Barowitz. I'm Economic and Labor Market Information Chief for the Vermont Department of Labor. That's a long job title for the short occupational title of economist. So I work for the Vermont Department of Labor. I'm happy to be here. When I do these talks, I've been going around and going all over the state doing similar talks. I say that this is the start of a conversation. I'm going to show a lot of information. We're going to talk about a lot of different subject matter. But really, the biggest takeaway you can have from this discussion, if anything piques your interest or you have questions that you can ask here, and I do encourage people to ask questions as we're going through this, but just know how to reach out and get in touch with me. My contact information is going to be here. It's in the presentation. It's going to be at the end. I have business cards. Again, start of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. And just, again, very excited to be here in Franklin County. The FC, very exciting, very exciting. My mom hails, she grew up in Swanton. So I've spent a lot of time up here, and it's fantastic to be up here again. And we'll talk about Swanton. Swanton's an interesting location, and it's going to become relevant in our discussion as we move forward. Because as an economist, you realize that demand for your services are counter-cyclical, meaning during good economic times, no one wants to talk to you, and during bad economic times, everyone wants to talk to you, right? So I've actually been spending a significant amount of time in southern Vermont. I look back on my calendar this year and I was like, man, I've been to southern Vermont more than I ever have since working for the Department of Labor, and I've been here about 8 years. And I started thinking about it, it's like, oh yeah, we're counter-cyclical. So some of the trends we're actually going to be highlighting for this area are quite positive and quite strong overall, and we're going to actually juxtaposition them to where southern Vermont is and other parts of the country. So, with an introduction, again, questions as we go. So the Economic and Labor Market Information Division, though I am a state employee, I'm 100% federally funded, predominantly by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is very defined in what they want us to do. They say, collect, analyze, compile data, and release data consistent with federal methodology. So when I release an unemployment rate for the state of Vermont at 2.9%, you can rest assured that that information is comparable to California. When we say what the unemployment rate is in Burlington, Vermont, it's comparable to Austin, Texas. It's part of this national system of 54 regions. So we have the 50 states, plus DC, Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. And as a result, we have this comprehensive US system. We track employment by industry, we track employment by occupation, we track wage by occupation, wage by industry, we do occupational projections, and we study the labor force. We look at who's employed, who's not employed, who's looking for work, who's not looking for work, and the demographics associated with that. So we have a lot of information. Again, just knowing how to reach out to me, you don't even know how to ask the question perfectly, just kind of start a question or start a conversation is all I encourage people to do. So the Employment and Training Administration, they give us a small pot of money and they say, you know what, the Bureau of Labor Statistics gives you all this money to produce data, but they give you no money to go talk about it, or have a website, or do special studies, or partner with educational institutions to talk about programming, or partner with employers to talk about training and skills. And so that's the Employment and Training Administration makes it possible for us to be here today. So very excited for our federal partners doing that. And these slides are actually more for me. They're just kind of a prompt to keep me going. And they are available, I did see in a hard copy. But I should be able to explain everything that's coming up. I don't want people to get scared by data or graphs. Basically, I think of economics as stories. What's happened in the past and how we think those stories are going to continue into the future to help us make decisions. Because really, that's the goal of our division. That's the goal of an economist. I'm not here to tell you what to do. You know what to do better than I do in terms of if you're a business or a school or you're an elected official. All I can do is help provide information to help you make a decision. So I'm just here to provide information, hopefully to help you make a decision. So first, I want to get this out of the way. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the work you do for the state of Vermont. And it's not even the stuff that happens 9 to 5, right? It's the stuff that happens potentially outside your job. Taking an interest in what's happening with the neighbor's kid, you know, and saying, hey, did you know about apprenticeships? Or doing a job shadow or an internship for a young person. Making yourself available and spreading that information is so beneficial to the Vermont economy, and we'll talk about why that is. So thank you for everyone for being here, being part of this board, part of these conversations, part of these advisory groups. So, so important. So now we're going to talk about the data. Data kind of is fun, right? People like data, right? It's quite a group for a big group, right? So anyway, this is a story, and this is US data. This represents every recession since World War II, what we call modern economic history. The reason they call this the Great Recession is because the amount of jobs lost, that's north to south, up to down, all this has been standardized into percentage terms so we can compare the economy of the 1950s to the economy of the 2000s and whatnot. So it's percent job loss, up to down, and then months left to right at how long it took to get jobs back. So the reason this was called the Great Recession is because it was deeper. We lost more jobs on a percentage basis than any other recession that we'd ever had since World War II. And it took longer to get those jobs lost as well as to gain back, significantly longer. So to put it in scale, 6 out of every 100 jobs in the Vermont economy were lost during this economic downturn. We're talking from 2007 to 2010. So over a 3-year period, 6 out of every 100 jobs were lost in the US economy. And then you march forward from 2010, and how long it took for us to gain that back was a significantly long period of time. Normally it's like 18 months up and down. We're talking about 6 years. Normally a business cycle from up to down, peak to peak, or trough to trough is 6 to 8 years. We're already in year like 11 of this current economic cycle. So this is a long period of economic expansion we've been going through since 2010. And so this will be some of the conversation we go forward. So when I take this red line forward and I add Vermont to it, you'll see that in Vermont, we don't get as cold during economic downturns, and we don't get as hot during economic upswings. A lot of people don't think about the Vermont economy as balanced, but it's true. We actually have quite a balanced economy. So when the US economy lost 6 out of every 100 jobs, Vermont only lost 4 out of every 100 jobs. So we're talking about the peak. But you'll see as the recovery has continued, the US economy started speeding off at a faster growth rate because, again, they get hotter and they get colder during the swings. When people does it surprise people to hear that, or does it surprise you to hear that Vermont has a balanced economy? What do people think about when they think about the Vermont economy? Where are our jobs? In what? What do we do? Tourism, right? We have a lot of tourism jobs. Up here, a lot of agricultural jobs. Maybe we're just all farmers and or we're all ski bums, whatever it is, right? That's part of the narrative we have about the Vermont economy. But it's actually not true. We actually have a high concentration of manufacturing jobs. Relative to the US on a percentage basis, we have more manufacturing employment in Vermont than the US does. 9 out of every 100 jobs in the US is manufacturing. 11 out of every 100 jobs is manufacturing in Vermont. So we have a good base of manufacturing. We do have leisure and hospitality. We do have agriculture. But we also have professional and business and technical services. We'll talk a little bit about what those are. But also, because of our federal border, we have a significant amount of federal employment, especially around here, right in our backyard. Immigration services or border patrol. And not to mention construction, healthcare, private education, public education. It actually creates quite a balanced economy. Now here's where it gets interesting, because when I talk about Vermont data, a lot of people can look me in the face and say, that doesn't look anything like my neighborhood, that doesn't look anything like my family. So I can tell you we've been going through a period of economic growth for 7-8 years, and these are the boom times for this economy, right? It doesn't feel like that to everyone, and it's justifiably so, because when I talk about Vermont data, that's an aggregate, right? But we start breaking out that data. If we separate Vermont into 2 places, one being the Burlington labor market area, which, by the way, includes right where we're sitting today. Saint Albans has been part of the Burlington labor market area for a while, but if you break Burlington out, you can see Burlington only lost about 3 out of every 100 jobs, and they quickly took off and started growing like gangbusters. You look at the balance of the state, you remove that, we're talking about an area, the rest of the state, absent the northwest corner, has fewer jobs than in 2007 today. So 11 years of economic time has passed, and they are still 2 jobs down from where they were in 2007, 2 out of every 100. So this is why I've been going to the south so much, because everyone's like, my goodness, what's going on? So the data looks much different. So I wanted to talk about Swanton as much as I can today, because as I said, that's where my mom's from, and I loved it so much. It was great. Dairy farm out on Route 7. This data, when we talk about labor market areas, I have a lot of data either broken out by town or county or state. A lot of times we look at labor market areas. Labor market areas are defined by where people live, work, and shop. It's like commuting pattern data, right? It's based by the US Census Bureau. Unfortunately, it's all decided by Washington, D.C., and they tell us, here are your labor market areas, because we'd love to have a seat at that table. But in 2000, the Burlington labor market did not include Swanton. When the 2010 census was conducted, they realized there were so many people commuting from Swanton to the Burlington area that it now is included. Swanton and Enosburg used to be its own labor market area up here, but now Swanton is now considered part of the Burlington labor market area. And when you're driving north on 89, like I was tonight from Montpelier, coming up here, you can see the traffic, right? People are now living farther and farther north, so much so that the data between 2000 and 2010 changed significantly enough now that Swanton is part of the labor market area here in Burlington. So that's a big storyline. That was a big storyline coming out of the US Census Bureau's data. So this story, and some of the stories we're going to talk about today are not Vermont specific. They're actually part of the national conversation that are going on. One, Americans are getting older. The average age of Americans is increasing. We hear a lot about Vermonters are getting older, right? That's true. We're 2nd or 3rd oldest state in the nation, depending on how we cut the data. So Vermonters are on the edge of that leading trend, right? This divide between rural and urban is also part of the US conversation. This is considered an urban-based economic recovery. All the urban centers, all the cities across the country are booming. It doesn't always feel like that. But, and it's the rural parts of America that are struggling the most. And we're finding that in the southern parts of the state, and potentially even some of the parts up here in northern Franklin County, whatever it might be. If you're not reaping those spoils of the economic gains going on in Burlington, it can feel like, my goodness, when is it going to be our turn to start getting our fair share? So this concept of urban versus rural is a big thing that's going on. And if this is an urban-based recovery, we see that Burlington is actually showing a lot of signs, or some early indications of economic weakness in the last year. Could be because they have lots of jobs and they can't fill them. This is a count of filled jobs. So if I have 1,000 jobs I can't fill, that's not going to be in this data, right? So could be some of that. We also know Burlington, they've taken off some big malls. They've started some big projects, so they've actually been ramping down it before they ramp up big projects. So it's hard to say what this is, and it'll take us about another 3 to 6 months before we get better data to understand that trend. But it's something I put on the table when I talk to especially legislators or elected officials of, you know, it is sunny now, we need to make hay now, right? And if these are signs that the day is running long, we need to figure out what the next steps would be if we start facing the next economic downturn. Because as I mentioned, we're already year 11 in the business cycle, which is beyond the typical 6 to 8 years. So that's kind of the preamble of how I start these conversations. Now we're going to dive into some other things, because these are accounts of full jobs. And when we look at breaking it down in industry of where these jobs are, when you look at where the job growth has been since 2010 to current, and where the job growth is expected to go, it's the same. And so I said, well, let's just talk about one, because where it has occurred is where it's expected to occur. There's been some growth in natural resources and mining and construction. Those are typically with the business cycle. As the economy improves, so does construction, so does activities associated with construction like natural resources and mining. But it's been these three that have been the ones that have been driving economic growth in Vermont. It's part of a national story as well, which are professional business and technical services, education and health services, and then leisure and hospitality. Those three have been experiencing the most growth recently, and they're projected to continue to grow. So some of the conversations I've had with Leanne about programming, about how they support these things, and we can talk about that in a separate conversation, but this has been the growth and where it's occurred. But this is job growth. And if you're a job seeker, like Department of Labor, we work with job seekers. Anyone who walks in the door looking for work, you don't care if that's a new job to the firm or you're filling an old seat. Sandy retired, and now you got to take over Sandy's job, right? So there's no difference between a job opening due to job growth or a retirement or someone quit. It doesn't matter if you're a job seeker. So this is just job growth. We know when we look at the data, there's 3 industries that skew, the average profile of the worker is older, and that is construction, manufacturing, and healthcare. You look at those 3 industries are going to have a significant amount of job openings just due to normal job churn, due to retirements, and associated natural progression in and out of the labor market. But so healthcare, manufacturing, and construction are going to have job openings not represented here in job growth. So when we highlight that manufacturing has had a significant downturn in employment, that's a national story. That's been going on since the 1950s. Manufacturing is still a going concern. They still have a lot of productivity. They still have a lot of profitability. And they're still going to need a lot of employment. The difference is some firms are trying to go from 100 people to 110, meaning grow, while manufacturing is currently at 100. They know they're going to lose 20 to retirements in the next couple of years, and we need 10 more of those back. And we're going to adopt technology, and we're going to do things a little differently, but we're still going to have a tremendous amount of openings in manufacturing. So this is to not shortcut or short sell what's going on in manufacturing, because we're seeing that there's a tremendous amount of job openings in manufacturing, and employers are saying, we need people with the skills. And we're going to talk about skills in just a minute. And we have to be mindful of time, Leanne, because as you can see, I'm a chatterbox. I can go for hours. Just wind me up and go. I'm like Matt Foley on Saturday Night Live, drinking coffee in the basement for several hours. So I wanted to highlight some jobs, because when we talk about, this is projected growth, right? I mean, we can talk about projected growth or projected openings. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't translate to actual economic activity unless you can partner somebody to that job, unless you can get someone in that position, which switches us from talking about what industry needs to what our labor force looks like. And when we switch and start looking Franklin County, this is all just a big breakdown of where the age demographics are. The big storylines here for Franklin County, and the next slide we'll skip through is Chittenden, is these numbers right here are so stand out. What these are? Positive population growth. It doesn't sound like a big deal, right? But in Vermont right now, it is something like 10 or 9 counties out of 14 are experiencing negative population growth. So when we're talking about Franklin County, and I'm talking about the positive news that's going on up in here, is that these are positives. The trend in population has been increasing in Franklin County. Population in Chittenden County has been increasing. So you have less of a problem as it relates to labor force, and we can talk about, there's lots of components about labor force, but at least as a sheer number, it is not so much that it's contracting. You're not trying to swim uphill, basically. The other thing that's always interesting about Franklin County is it has, on a county basis, the highest concentration is 0 to 4-year-olds. And it continues to be that way. So that's always interesting. And we have this data broken out and I can have conversations. But even though it has a high concentration of young people I just talked about, relative to the state, it's still not overcoming what's going on across the state, which is that as a concentration, people are getting older, and the concentration of people 55 and older is increasing. Right? That's just part of the narrative that's going on in the US, and it's just a little bit more highlighted here in Vermont because we're a small population and because we're a little bit older. So, same as I said with Chittenden County, they have some positive population growth, lesser young people on a concentration basis. So, people. So that's just part of it. That's just one piece of it. How many people do you have? Then we can talk about how many people are actually looking for employment. This is US data from 1950 to 2060. Bureau of Labor Statistics said, we're going to put together labor force data and say, here's all the historical data, and then we're going to put together a forecast of what we think is going to happen. And what's fascinating, that in the US, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is concluding there's going to be fewer people in the labor force. People are going to be looking for work less, by men and women. And you say, well, we just talked about how people are getting, on average, older, so maybe it's because of retirements. When you switch to away from gender and look at age, it's also by every age category. So mature workers, the 55 plus, they're expected to decline. The young workers, 16 to 24, projected to decline. 25 to 54, and this is where eyes started popping out of people's heads when they started seeing the decline in the labor force participation rate of 25 to 54-year-olds. The prime working age, where you're expecting people to really churn out their best years from a work standpoint. This really got people's attention. This started making a lot of national news. People started diving into that data, and we can talk about that as a side conversation about what's happening there. But when the Department of Labor, Vermont Department of Labor, saw this, we said, we are going to make sure that we do everything we can to keep our participation rates up for 25 to 54-year-olds, and we are going to do everything we can to make sure our participation rates for 16 to 24-year-olds stays as high as we can make it as well. And so we'll talk about the partnerships we've developed to try and do these things. And mature workers, we have a lot of support in place. And some people want to retire, and that's fine. We want to encourage that if that's their choice. But if they want to stay in the labor force, we also want to make that possible too. So we talked about population here. Population decline isn't such an issue. But population labor force participation rate, as we're going forward, may be. And so these are what we're talking about. So I heard there might be some employers in this room. Yes, any? Yes? Anybody having difficulty hiring? Anyone having difficulty finding talent? Yeah? Seeing some heads nod? We have an extremely tight labor market out there. And this has been ongoing for a couple of years now. It's just at all levels, entry level all the way to professional level. And so when we go out and talk to young people, or we're trying to communicate to individuals, we're talking about the jobs that are available and the entrepreneur opportunities as well. Because we've even talked to businesses that are saying, I'm looking to retire and I don't know who I'm going to turn my keys over to in 5 years. So we're talking about ready-made, going concern businesses that are looking for someone to be the next wave to take it the next 2, 3, 4 decades into the future. So what our concerns as a division has been is basically declining labor force participation rate among young people, because there's a lot of research that says if you delay when you get in the labor force until you're 25, 30, your outcomes are a lot worse. You don't have that experience to rely on. I started at A&P Grocery. Anyone remember A&P?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Had great chocolate ice cream there. House brand was good. So making sure young people know the opportunities available to them and that they can be successful here in Vermont. Because when we talk about the public narrative, how many times have you heard that conversation? There's no jobs in Vermont, right? And if you can win that conversation, if you're lucky enough to win that conversation that yes, there are jobs in Vermont, then the conversation goes, well, there's no good paying jobs in Vermont. And the employers in the room just want to shake their head and say, that doesn't help anybody, right? Spreading that message. So this is why we have that big challenge to all of us, and going back to the idea of apprenticeships or job shadows or internships. What can we do to expose individuals at all age levels to the employment opportunities around here? We actually came up with some fun games to say, oh, would you rather do the dishes or make dinner? Who wants to do the dishes? make dinner. No one's playing. I'm gonna do the dishes guy. The other ones that gets people thinking, because what we can do is translate that directly to skills that individuals, particularly young people, have already. Can you do the dishes? Yes. Can you make dinner if I gave you the instructions? Yes. Clean teeth or do someone's taxes, right? And that gets people thinking. Would you rather clean teeth or do someone's taxes? Well, what if I told you it's within 6 to 12-month short programs, post-secondary education that can get you employment opportunities in either of those, which are, could be $40,000 to $60,000 a year jobs, right? So we're just trying to talk about the education opportunities, aligning them, making people aware of them. Because I've got to be mindful of time because I will go into a rabbit hole. How much?
I would say you have another 8 minutes.
Okay. And I've had no questions so far. This must be, yeah, okay. So Maslow's hierarchy, and I think it's similar to Bloom's taxonomy, where you start from the bottom and you work your way up. I said, there's got to be something for employers, right? And in the Vermont Department of Labor, we used to call basically every employer. Like, it wasn't as simple as A to Z, but we had a system, and we make 2,000 calls a month asking employers what you're looking for and what you need. We stopped those calls because A, employers were getting tired of us calling, I'm sure, but B, because the information they were providing was not changing. It wasn't deviating. Employers said, we need certain things. And so I said, we're going to come up with an employer's hierarchy of needs. The more skills you have, the higher you're going to get paid. That doesn't change. If you can throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, you are an elite group of individuals. You can get the big dollars, right? But for more regular people who can't throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, we need to think about how skills are demanded. And we started coming up with it and said, you know what? Every employer, whatever industry, whatever occupation they were looking to hire, kept saying, I need someone who can show up on time, work well with others, and follow instructions. If I can get someone who can do that, I will hire them every time and I'll train them to do the rest, right? These other skills, expertise, skills, and specialized, initiative, responsibility, all these other things. And it's just been these core things we hear over and over and over again. So bringing that message to young people and saying, hey, can you articulate this? Can you show up on time? How can you convince an employer that, yes, I can show up on time. Yes, I can follow instructions. Yes, I can work well with others. That's a big component to what education is about. I think it's a gap in communication sometimes, or maybe it's a lack of confidence where young people don't understand how those simple skills, they might seem as simple skills, or they might even not recognize them as skills at all, translates directly into what employers are looking for across industries, across occupational demands. So we'll kind of zip through. I'm just going to highlight that within the middle skills, we do see a significant gap. And we're talking about post-secondary trainings, career technical education. We've talked about the programming here, spot on, right? Aligning to what employers are looking for. It's so great to have employers in the room contributing those conversations to ensure that that training is aligning to their needs, because otherwise, we need to fill this gap between where the employment opportunities are and where the talent is, and saying, you know what, young person, if you just took a 6-month course or this 1-year apprenticeship, we can get you in a job that's going to pay to $40,000 to $60,000 and get you on a path to self-sufficiency. So one of the things we've done recently is we said we want to look at our data differently. We're trying to create it so it's regional, actionable, so that people can reference it. So what you'll see here is some data we've created by Career Technical Education Center. Catchment areas. So the areas that are surrounding the Career Technical Education Center, we repopulated our data to say, who are the employers in this area? And then does programming align? It started a lot of conversations. The South was particularly interested because we need to make sure our programming is aligning because employers are telling us they can't hire and we're not sure of the programs we're using. And so we've had conversations with Leanne and Lisa about the programs that they have, because there's 2 ways this data gets put together. One, by sheer concentration. This is the deep end of the pool, right? You look at it, you say, well, here's the big parts, health and social science services, manufacturing, retail trade, public administration, that's your border, that's your government employment, which would also include public education, and education services. But if I said health and social services, manufacturing, retail trade, public administration, that's like any place USA. Those are the big areas. So we wanted to say, at a minimum, you need to know where your largest concentration of employment are. Then we said, well, let's put this in a percentage term, so let's standardize it to see what makes this place unique. What makes this area unique so that it says, now I'm starting to get a picture of our local economy. And so this is done by a concentration relative to Vermont. Are there more or less on a percentage basis of these jobs in Vermont versus this area, the Northwest Career Technical Education Center? And you can see this is shocking. When I saw this particular one, because most are going to look like Burlington's. This is Burlington's. You see they're all narrow down here and you get a couple of spikes out? Not here. You get either we're all in or we're not in, right? And so it gives you a different picture when you start saying administrative and waste services. That's something we hadn't discussed. Agricultural and forestry. That's something we hadn't discussed looking at the previous graph. Manufacturing, we already hit on, but now it reinforces to say, not only did we have a big slice of the pie in manufacturing, we have a significant concentration. So there's something going on in this area related to manufacturing that's really important to our local economy. Public administration, again, those government jobs, immigration services as it comes to mind. And lastly, transportation and warehousing. Again, I think of all those conversations I've had with economic development professionals where Quebec companies are looking to get a footprint or a foothold in the United States, so they set up something. That's what I think of when I think of transportation and warehousing services. So these industries, you can see that there's a big concentration. These 5 are really, really highly concentrated here. And it starts a conversation of, are we sure that our programming is aligning to this, making sure that we're developing the skills and the workforce necessary to supply our local employment opportunities. So I'm gonna, question?
Question, sorry.
Yeah.
Is that graph for this tech center or for all of them?
Northwest.
Okay.
Yep, the Career Technical Education Center for Northwest. Yep. Good clarifying question. So this is like, gives it the feel of, when I start saying, oh yeah, agriculture and forestry, you say, yeah, there's a big component of that up here in Franklin County. So the Chittenden data is also provided, but I want to, on the interest of time, I'm just kind of going to move through them. I also wanted to highlight some other data we have available, again, to start a conversation or something you can follow up with me. Franklin County is a tremendous exporter of workers to other counties. This is county data, and you'll see the inflow. There's about 6,000 coming into work in Franklin County every day, and there's about 13,000 going out. And so you can see this is what in economics, I live in Addison County now, also kind of agricultural based, similar. We're both feeding Chittenden County, right? So it's at what economists call like a bedroom community. But there's an opportunity to retain some of that employment in the county if they had the employment opportunities and they matched up, because who likes to commute if they had the choice? We also have some demographic information. This is for Franklin County as well. So this is by workers, not residents, but this is the workers of Franklin County. And you can see there's a higher concentration of individuals with slightly higher than less than high school, and some college. And the lower concentration of workers have a bachelor's degree here. As far as age profiles, it actually skews quite young. And that's, as we talked about for Franklin County, that's unique to this area, where you have a higher concentration of 29 and under, and then the 30 to 54s. So there's Chittenden. That brochure, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but we're in our 3rd iteration coming out in the beginning of December. I have a couple of copies if people want to see it, but it's basically a partnership with the McClure Foundation, who partnered with us, said you have great data, but it's really ugly, and we want it to look nice, and so people actually use it. And so they came up with a Promising Pathways brochure, and we worked with them to make sure the data is accurate, and it's telling a story that will help individuals make decisions about career choices here in Vermont. And then we're also, the department itself is expanding direct services to recovery centers. We've heard that individuals in recovery, some of the greatest barriers can be employment, and so making sure that that connection is being happen right on premise is something that just started this summer. We're doing greater public outreach with the libraries. The libraries are saying we're getting more traffic of job seekers. People feel more comfortable going to their local library than going into a state facility. So we're actually going to start arming them with some tools and resources and some training that's going to go on this winter. And we're just about to release an update on our technology study as part of our internship program. So I know when I'm asking employers to consider an internship program, I know how hard it is to have interns. I know what a commitment and work it is, but also I know that I've hired 2 of those coming out of those programs. So it has, it can have significant positive impacts as well. So that is my time. Question?
How does affordability, cost of living, fold into these equations?
Basically all this is almost like absent consideration of that. So what this is either been a count of employment opportunities as they exist by place of employment, or characteristics of workers by place of residence. So, when I talked about the expansion of Swanton now in the Burlington labor market area, I think that's kind of where the conversation can happen, is perhaps affordability of housing has kind of pushed more people to farther and further away from wherever they might work. So you'll get that kind of effect on it. But yeah, that's really like a separate conversation.
We've seen it, the reason I asked is we've seen that with entry-level positions, trying to get people into Vermont, not just into Chittenden County.
Yeah.
And that is just a tough one.
It is a tough one, and the affordability issue is it's a tough one for an economist too, because this is it. I'm here to present information, not to. If you heard me give an opinion tonight, then I misspoke, because I have no opinions in my professional capacity. But when we talk about things like affordability, especially when related to housing, the preferences and tastes of individuals purchasing housing today is much different than it was in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I think my parents started out in a single wide, and today, like, a starter home is a 3-bedroom, 3-bath, right? And it's just like, well, that, we need to talk about what affordability is. And certainly, when I talk to individuals, especially doing work with like mature workers, who are saying, I'm getting out of the state as fast as I can. I've actually been in my job long enough that I've actually seen people start coming back because they went to Tennessee or they went to one of the Carolinas and said, there's some magical place out there where you make great money and it's really cheap to live. I tried that in my 20s when I thought San Diego was going to be that, and it was not anything like that. It was not easy to find work. It was not easy to find housing. It was super expensive. And you realize that, things kind of balance out. Like, if there was that magical place, we would all find it and rush in there. Look what happened to the Dakotas. Like, Dakotas, like McDonald's was paying something like $30 an hour because people were getting hired right off of their shift saying, hey, you want to come work? We're going to the power plant. And they'd be like, great. People are paying, a couple $1,000s for like a built shack that was just thrown up within, 24 hours. So that affordability issue is tough. And we know anecdotally that Vermont could be a little bit more expensive than other places just because of the climate, the necessity for heat, necessity for transportation because we're a rural state. But when you look at our wage data will stack up pound for pound over against the US. We're never going to beat Boston. We're never going to beat LA. But when it comes to generally speaking the US, we have slightly above average a median wage, we have above average income levels, and so we're about 19th, I think, in the country for income. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one, but that's part of that public narrative that you hear all the time too. That it's like it's too expensive to live here, and then young people say, "Oh, I hear it's too expensive to live here. I also hear there's no jobs here," and so guess what? They go somewhere else, and then they find out it's also tough to get set up someplace else. So it's a tough one, and I welcome thoughts or feedback on that because we're always looking for things to look into or things that would be helpful for that conversation. So I see a hand up over here.
You have all this great data that you said you don't have an opinion on, and you sounds like you travel a lot throughout Vermont to give presentations. So who do you give the data to, and then how does that data help them? Like, do you partner with them to, like I'm saying, concentrations of jobs in Northwest Tech here, just the 4 or 5 areas here.
Yep.
How do you cultivate that and bring that along, and how do you give them the resources to, give them skills that make people want to stay on those jobs and stay in the area?
Yeah, it's thankfully I'm blessed to have been born and raised in Vermont, and get to go a side trip, but it's all relationships, right, in Vermont. And so I'm willing to go. I have staff that are willing to go anywhere we're invited. So if there's conversations that people want to have, we're always happy to either pick up the phone or go places. We're small enough we can get there. But I've been in elementary schools working with elementary school teachers. That's as low as we've gone to is 4th grade. But we go into colleges, universities, we go into businesses, we go to industrial groups. So we'll go anywhere. What's that?
Consult, or how does that?
We can talk through it, but ultimately you have to make a decision for your local populations. Like, yeah. We're not going to be held accountable because like voters have to hold someone else accountable, So we would, happy to talk through what this means, what it doesn't mean, like what are the skills underlying those particular industries. We're happy to talk about that all day long. We have lots of information. Yeah, and would be happy to continue the discussion, as I said.
I just want to make sure that people know that the program advisories can go ahead and start meeting, and Matt is actually gonna come around if you have specific questions for him.
Yep.
He'll answer those for you, and then he can continue answering questions to the board if they have any. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't anything anybody said. Other than that.
Did that kind of answer your question? It's,
Kind of.
Yeah.
I don't think people take advantage of Vermont Department of Labor as much as they're maybe not aware of the reasons.
agreed.
How do you get that out there?
Yeah, and like I'm always surprised at which schools invite us places. This isn't my first time to actually the Northwest for Technical Education Center, so I know this is an organization that has in the past contacted us. There's certain schools that love to contact us regularly, certain schools that want us to work with their teachers, some schools want us to work with their curriculum developers, other schools want us to work with their students. And we'll go wherever we're invited and do our best and try and develop either new content or recycle old content that would be helpful. Yeah. Thoughts, questions? Tell me I'm full of it. Happened before.
Matt, you came here before and you spoke with our students. Do you remember that? You presented the Performing Arts Center.
Yeah, I was in the auditorium.
Yep, so you were, you can not only speak to adults and board members and advisory committee members, but can also get along with teenagers as well. So they were, it was well received.
Yeah, that's been an area we're really trying to focus on just to make sure young people start connecting their abilities and skills to understanding how they transfer to the employment community. So that kind of game of like, oh, would you rather do the dishes or make dinner? It's a conversation because those are skills that are currently in demand by employers right now. And it gets people thinking. Another good one is, would you rather answer the phone or call someone? Watching young people answer that question is interesting because you have to, A, they don't like the phone, period, I guess. And then it's like, oh, I don't want to answer it, but I don't want to call anyone either. And like, if you're calling someone, you're selling the moment you call because they don't want to talk to you. But if you're answering the phone, they could be yelling at you from minute one. And I've worked in a call center, so I can relate to those experiences of what, how it's different. And just kind of connecting individuals. Students have preferences, job seekers have preferences, and they have skills, and trying to connect those two for them and making it something that they feel they can have firm footing on to move forward is so important. And that's why the career technical education is so important, because it's that real life application of it, so they feel their skills building, and they might not recognize the value of all the teamwork, the soft skills that get built along with it, because that is also so key. As I said, employers are willing to train for a lot of things, unless you can't show up on time, unless you're punching out coworkers, unless you're stealing, things like that, where it's just like, you got to get over those beginning hurdles. Yeah. Please.
Curious, what's your educational background?
I went to Essex High School, and I went to UVM. I did a double major economics and French as a part of the Quebecois heritage up here.
Yeah.
And then I said, I've had enough of Vermont for a bit, so I moved to France, and then lived in Boston for a summer, and then lived in San Diego, where I got a master's in economics. After living in San Diego for 5 years, I said I wanted to move back to be closer to family. My French was not helpful 30 minutes from Tijuana. So I said, I'm going back to where I can use some French, and that's culturally, language is so important in this area. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you so much for having me. Tina's going to show me around. Great.
Thank you.
And I said I did bring a few of these. If people, I don't have a lot of them, but because we're phasing them out because the new ones are coming out in December. But if someone would like to see one now, I'd be happy to make these available. Leave them behind or take them with me.
Leave them behind if you can. Thank you.
Yeah, these are just. I'll leave them with you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Matthew.
Yes, it was very, very interesting.
Oh.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so now it brings us to item 6, which is the consent agenda. Tonight's consent agenda has the approval of minutes from 3 October. It has a media packet, and it has a couple of grants. 1 grant?
2 grand.
2 grants?
Looked like 2 grand.
Okay. Is there any reason to pull any of these items out of the consent agenda for discussion or for a separate vote? Anybody want to pull them out? Then if there's no objections, these items will be adopted. Are there any objections? See no objections. Move on to item 7, old business. 5-year plan, which I believe Kevin is passing out now.
So, as you know, when we became a merged district, one of the first things we did was come up with a 5-year plan. And we spoke to you about that plan when we first did it, and we've tried to yearly keep you updated on where we are with the plan. So what you have in front of you is the plan, color-coded. And I would just say before we start that when we look at this, or when I look at this in total, I'm somewhat amazed at what this district has done. It truly has. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that the district has been transformed over the last couple of years. And that's not to say that there isn't more work to do. But work that this board, that our administrators, our staff, all have put into this, to take a Franklin Central and make it Maple Run has been truly great in my estimation. What I thought I'd like to do today is go down through it, explain it to you. I don't want to take a long time on this because some of this you may just want to look at and digest. But at least it'll give you an idea where we are. I'm going to move relatively fast because there's 26 different items. But I would ask you, whenever you have a question, please interrupt me and just, at that point we can talk about any certain thing you might not understand or want more clarification on. So we started out, we had a goal of developing a district-wide school choice or intention for students. As you all know, that's done. It's been in place for a couple of years. It's been extremely successful. And parents and students have been very, very happy. And for some students who went through the system, it's really helped them being able to go to different schools. Unified pre-kindergarten registration processes has been done. Pre-kindergarten and kindergarten has been done. Ensure policies and procedures are appropriately followed across schools. That's pink because it's implementation. We're constantly doing that. As you know, as a board, we continue to have policies that come up that have to go through the board on it. But generally, thanks to Kathy, she's done a nice job about getting everything. So we've certainly moved our Franklin Central policies over to Maple Run. And we continue to look at things as they come up, or as the state has suggested other policies and things like that. So it's ongoing. Develop a communications plan. You saw that last year, I believe, beginning of last year, where we put a communication plan in place. That's how you see the newsletter that we put out to the community and put out to the staff. And you have my media packet that I give you each year, so you see all the stuff that's put in the newspaper. So and we continue to working on that too, and enhancing that, the whole communications part. Complete transportation study, done. We keep tweaking, keep looking at things, but that was put into place last year. Schools support each other in immediate facility and operations needs with their capacity, and that's up through this present year. What we're talking about there is every school has always been a little bit different, the way they handle operations. They all have their own facilities directors. However, there's so much that can be learned and done at this communication between buildings. And so for the last 3 years, that's what we've tried to do to enhance that, to have meetings, Martha and I will often have meetings with facilities people to talk about how things are going. They're now communicating with each other, which a couple of years ago was a rarity. If they need something, they'll call upon another person. If we have a electrician on staff, and it's in one building, he's in one building, he'll go over to another building and do what needs to be done that way. So it's saved us in a lot of cases. Next year, we're looking at researching whether there's better ways or increased ways of unifying those operations. But that's for the year 1920. But we've been successful as far as what we've been doing at this point. Martha, would you add anything to that?
No, that's fine.
I just think it's really good that they're talking, because it drives me batty when I see somebody's putting in tile and somebody else is taking out tile, and it's like we should be learning from each other.
Yes. And that really is happening. This year, we're developing a technology study for the same reason, really, as the operations. We're looking at, right now, all of our schools do technology different. Some are using different computers. Some are using different software. Data is not completely done in a consolidated way, so we're getting different data from different schools. We're not purchasing together. Each school purchases their own equipment. So I just had a meeting today where we're with some techies, and we're looking at bringing somebody in to do a study and look at the schools and look at the areas I'm talking about. And how can we better utilize it? How can we save money on purchasing? And to give us recommendations moving forwards. And that might look like we need to have some sort of centralized technology management, which is in next year's 1920. But we don't know that yet.
So who's doing the study?
We don't know for sure. We had a meeting today, and we're talking with a person in Massachusetts.
But it's going to be a consultant.
It's a consultant.
Outside.
And outside, we want neutrality here. And we don't know if we're hiring him yet. That's why I'm just waiting. If that happens, then we come to the board and talk to you about it. We'll work from that.
Yeah, no, my question was whether it's outside or it's internal study.
Yeah, it's outside. Very good person. And the other thing we've got going for us is Peter Drescher, who's the technology director for AOE, Agency of Education, knows him well, and actually knows us very well, and is helping us with this, which is nice. So he's acting as a support for us. Curriculum and instruction is number 8. That's in progress. Will probably always be in progress. It's something that's ongoing. It's living, and we keep moving in the right direction. So, Sean's worked hard on that, Jesse before, and Mona now, and we keep moving and progressing in those areas. Next year, I think I may skip the next year's because that'll be for next year. Certainly feel free to read it, but in essence of time, I'll just keep moving. The next one has to do with equity. We've done a real nice job on that. We've adopted our equity statement. This is on the wall. We're continually looking at equity from all aspects. We don't make decisions anymore without asking the question, is it equitable? So we're certainly going in the right direction there. And we've gotten some good accolades around the state about adopting that equity definition. There's only about 3 boards so far who've done that, and it's been looked at very positively.
Wouldn't you say that's also one that goes on forever?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. both 11 and 12, we are continuing to look at our evaluation process to make it consistent. Each of our schools have been doing things differently. And incidentally, these are not criticisms. These are what we expect when you go from SU to a school district. But we do need to look at these, and that's putting administrators together, get all these minds together and talk about how do we do it? How do we evaluate our staff, and how do we do it consistently and following what the AOE is asking us to do? Because now, there's a very good chance that that person from town, staff member of town, is going to be working at city in 2 years. And there should be a common system in place. And there's a difference between year 1 and 2 and post 1 and 2, and that is a state regulation. Year 1 and 2 are probationary teachers, and there are certain things by statute we have to do more of. But that's going well. Kathy, do you have anything you might want to add with that?
We've worked hard on the first and second year process to make sure those are all done and on time. So I think we have a subcommittee of principals that are working on this, and I think we're moving along nicely.
The next one has been a bit of a toughie, but we continue to want to look at the procurement process for the kind of the same reason we talked about with the technology study, that how can we better buy stuff and do it efficiently, effectively, and save some money. When you do it in bulk, you're going to do it better than not. And if you're buying certain things, if you're doing everything through one school, what if you multiply that by 5 schools? And so we continue to look at how that's being done. We're starting small. This year we're trying out a couple types of purchases to see how that works, and then we're going to continue to try to expand that.
If I could, is this mostly, well, I suppose everything involved is over paper products for the bathrooms, to paper for the copiers, to...
You got it. Pencils?
So in the past, is it like different vendors, like whether it's Staples or Amazon or whoever, or?
No, it's more school-based. So the purchases are all done at a particular school. For their school, they purchase what they need. We're looking at more doing the purchases that they all need.
Right.
More
So, but
consistently.
from school to school, obviously people are using different vendors at different levels. Is that it? You're trying to...
Yep.
But even when I was
Take a look at it all.
doing all the city school purchase orders, it seemed like it was kind of all over the place. We were reimbursing individual teachers, and one would buy markers at this place, and one would buy them at here, and so there wasn't even within a building a standard.
Yeah, that's what we want to correct. And again, these are areas that a merger can take care of. I mean, we can save money along the way, but it's a process.
More expensive items that we'd be looking at are things that would go back to the technology and the operation and maintenance. Once those get more fleshed out as centralized, those are the areas that you're really going to start seeing the procurement process be more efficient.
Yeah.
But I would imagine even buying toilet paper for all the different schools, buying in bulk is gonna,
And most of,
reap
and
savings and
just so that everybody understands, I mean, we do have to follow procurement procedures, which means if you're purchasing anything over $15,000, you have to get multiple bids, and/or we follow so we have the Vermont bid law that we have to follow. But there are also vendors out there that have state contracts that the state has already done the procurement process for, and there's also some buying consortiums that we also work with, that they've done the procurement process and they've gotten the best prices. So we do a lot of our purchases through those services. And so, you know, it's not like we're not being proactive on it. We are on an ongoing basis. But it's looking at, you know, the larger big purchases that we do multiple of in the different buildings.
continue. We've done a real nice job of getting consistent with the PD process, professional development process. Our new contract helped us with that. One contract, one format for PD. So that's being implemented this year. We have had discussions around the design of our pre-K program. I've said this many times, and I think the board knows this. We've got one of the best, I think, pre-K programs in the state. We were one of the first to go universal pre-K when the state Act 166 was forcing the issue over a 2-year period. We handle a lot of our students. We've expanded the program into other schools now, so SATEC has a program that we haven't had before. We have full-time pre-K, we have part-time pre-K. So we're doing well on that. We have a few challenges coming up, which you will actually hear about under budget, up in the agenda. So we've done a nice job with that, and we're hoping to continue to expand that to all of our students who need that. And if they ever get the Act 166 implemented the way they should, our legislature, it'll certainly help us. Because right now there's still problems with that law. Which brings us to 16, which is discussions on the budget for pre-K, and that's what we'll talk to you a little bit about today. But we're having those discussions right now. 17, this gets complicated, but we're just looking at our different systems of supports. And we continue to do that to come up with some consistency with that. We started out with some self-assessments, and this year we're in progress. Well, we're planning. I'm sorry, we're planning at this point. And we will continue doing that. This is another one that will probably go on forever, because supports, especially nowadays with the additional challenges we have with our students, it's just going to be an ongoing review. We have had conversations around the hiring process. We're not quite there yet. We're implementing this year. We're very close because the process has gone from hiring with 5 different schools to hiring as one district. And there's so much involved, such complexity when you've got 600 staff members. And how you do that, how do you keep communication so the principal of the city and the principal of town and the principal of Fairfield know at all times what's out there, and maybe all 3 have a first grade teacher they have to hire. The way it used to be is everybody interviewed for a first grade teacher, and there was that competition, and so we've had to talk about that. We've got a document in place, a Google document in place, so everyone can look at all times. Kathy keeps that up, where everyone always knows throughout the district, all our administrators know this is what's happening. And they keep communicating with each other, and it's working pretty well.
Can I ask, how do you decide which school gets that one first grade teacher?
They've basically, yeah. They basically work those things out when it's come up. It especially happens with paraprofessionals. But then they're in control of it, and it's worked out.
So they get together and say,
well.
here's our pool,
Right.
this one would work better here.
Right.
Team interview instead of 4 different interviews.
Yeah.
And then the team decides where people are going to go.
Even foolish little things like when you put ads in the paper. We used to put an ad in the paper for
Each
one
building.
school, and then this school, and then this school, and the people out there didn't know they were in the same SU. And most of them could care less where they went, they just wanted a job. So this has just been real nice, and we're not quite there yet. We're still tweaking it, but I think we're pretty close.
So when someone interviews for a paraeducator, they're just looking for a paraeducating or a parent to get a position in the district or at a certain school? I would imagine that would make a difference to, if I was applying somewhere, I'd want to know where I'm applying to.
We post that for K-8 and high school. That seems to be the way things break out. And we post instructional para and non-instructional para.
Do you post locations?
So
I think?
people-
Do you post location?
If it says K-8, it says all three locations where that might happen.
We often have openings across school districts when it comes to paraprofessional positions. So it works out.
So if they're K-8, they could end up at any of the 3 schools.
Right.
Yep.
Do they have any say in that? Are they hired to work for the district?
Well,
So
they
I
wouldn't
guess-
be, they wouldn't be hired sight unseen, right? It
No,
would-
no,
It
but I
would be,
mean-
okay, here's what we have.
Okay.
And then we would talk about the best fit, and we would offer a position.
At a
based-
certain school?
Yes.
And then they could turn it down.
They could turn it down if they were
Exactly.
offered if they were interested in the position at city school but not town school.
I would assume that would come up in the interview if someone really wanted to work at a certain school.
We would definitely.
They would let
Yeah,
that be
we
known.
would ask that
Invitation.
preference.
Okay. Create a common district calendar. Should have been easy. But we're there.
So it was easy.
Yeah, well, yeah, as long as we make it look easy.
It's done, it was easy.
Yeah, we have one, no, we don't need to talk about 20, it's down the road. Obviously, we've created a mission and vision, thanks to this board and the work they've done on that with us, and our core values. And I thought that was a really cool process. And because of that process, I think we're all feeling very good about it and really use that as we make decisions. Research on the new phone system, done. We have it, we love it. We're no longer doing the smoke signals. 24, you'll be hearing about soon. Consideration of a bond. And actually, it will be talked about a little bit today. And there'll be further discussion on that. 25, we have a district handbook. It's on the website, Kathy, right?
Yes, it is. Yep.
District staff handbook, very complete. Kathy and Jermaine put huge amounts of work and hours into that, but it's been very helpful. Negotiations, done. One contract, thanks to Jim and the board, and what they've done there. Kathy, I actually have pictures. Kathy, you may or may not know this. I actually have pictures now that I show the state when they asked me to come in about Act 46. And the pictures show post and pre-negotiations and post-negotiations. And truly, we have this thick pre-negotiations, what we were looking at for agreements. Master agreements. And post. And people, that visual really shows things to people when they talk about Act 46 and they don't understand where some of the benefits could come. And that's huge and pretty powerful to show that. 27, obviously we bought the building. And we're feeling quite good about that. The 26, I'm sorry, have I got the right numbers?
28.
Yeah, 28 is new. You haven't seen this before. It's something that's added. A 5-year plan doesn't have to be stagnant. It can continue to move. And we talked this year about, we looked at this and said, how are we doing on this? Is there anything we should delete now? Is there anything we should add? And the board's heard many times, and this is not just Maple Run, this is national. The issues we're having now around social and emotional learning, trauma, opioid addiction, all of these issues have skyrocketed to the point that it's almost, it's very, very difficult to keep up. And Joanne, I'm sure you, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. I can't see you.
I'm over here. No, you're doing fine.
Strategic move.
Thanks, Jim. So, we felt a great need to start this process of looking at a system in place for Maple Run on how we're gonna handle the SEL problems. And we're doing it in various ways. Joanne and Michelle and many of us have been going to the district management group meetings, which are a group that has been working with people over SEL and talking about systemic change. And we're looking at what's the appropriate staffing for this. You know, a lot of times the governor will say that staffing continues to go up and enrollment going down, and he wonders why. That's 90% of the reason why staffing is going up in so many areas, because it has to do with behaviorists, mental health specialists. Those are the issues where we're needing to do more with. And it's hard. But we're starting that this year. I think we're all feeling pretty good about the direction we're going, but it's going to take a while.
And hasn't the state talked to about identifying those kind of, I guess, non-educational things and funding them from the general fund as opposed to from the ed fund?
Yeah, and you're going to hear about that at some point. We haven't really talked about it, but Act 173 is a new act that the legislature did last year because they didn't have anything to do. Wow. But, well, I get a little cynical. However, this is a case that, depending who one talks to, could have some very interesting impact, negative or positive. As Jeff was saying, what Act 173 says, instead of doing the regular special ed model that we always use, which is kind of a model of almost motivating you to make people special ed so that you can get money, that's going to stop over the next few years. I think 2025 is the final year of the process. But what we'll be getting is a block grant through our census. And we use that money for special ed and non-special ed. Anybody who needs supports. And we all know that you don't have to be on special education to need additional supports. So it's our job, and what we're looking at right now, which is part of this, is how do you do that? Because if you don't use it right, if you don't think differently about how you staff and teach, then you're going to run out of money with that type of grant. Because there's no, right now, if you make somebody special ed, you're going to get additional reimbursement. If you get a block grant on census, you're not getting additional monies through that. So that is a huge area as we're looking at that. Thank you for bringing that up. Anything else?
I guess in that case, there'd be a lag too if you're a growing area in terms of population.
A lag.
In the census data catching up.
Yeah, and I don't know that law that specifically, but there's like a 3-year.
Yeah, there's an implementation of, they're slowly gonna
So it's
basically
like
wean us off of the reimbursement formula and bring us into the census formula over that 5 years span.
So we have that 5 years to try to build capacity to
Yep.
decrease our reliance on contracting with the mental health agencies and with other agencies to provide services for these really high need kids. And so part of the
That's where our
social
big money
emotional
is.
learning is we're getting it going now because we've got to get ahead of this. And it's a huge cultural change in the schools.
So you hire your own mental health counselors versus getting them from NCSS?
And we would build capacity within our system for our own behavior interventionists and behavior specialists, so that we're not contracting with either NCSS or there are several other organizations that we contract with. Because the special education budget, I just finished the service plan and I'm getting feedback from the state, and they want to know why our special education numbers increased in the way that they did. And a lot of it has to do with what Kevin mentioned, is it's the demographics and the challenges our kids are facing. And so we're not over-identifying, or we're not putting kids on special ed, on IEPs for no reason. But then that leads to, can we serve them in our schools, or do we have to look at out-of-district placements for them to meet those therapeutic needs? So it's a catch-22, and I'm not sure that the Agency of Education really understands all of the layers that are involved, because we have to have kids in a place where they're ready to learn. And if they're not ready to learn, it's the social emotional component that's the foundation to being ready to learn.
And part of that building of capacities is hiring people who can come in and work with our regular ed teachers. They're not necessarily, in some cases, prepared to teach what we would call a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 student who has significant trauma. But if you don't have special ed teachers doing everything with regular ed teachers, you're going to have to be more skilled in that area. So that's what we're looking at.
I think we need more definition on what that trauma is for each student. What's the criteria that will place them in this type of, or is that part of the assess current reality?
I didn't hear the question because the post is in our way.
No, I guess is there going to be certain criteria around, I guess,
Yes.
this program?
Yes, so there's the first step is to develop a framework, and the second step is to look at competencies, just like the standards that we look at in other areas for academics. So it really mirrors that, it's just the content is different. So it's teaching self-regulation skills. It's actually, listening to Matt give his presentation, what they're in the employment industry is known as soft skills, the ability to follow instructions, to demonstrate responsibility, how to show up on time, follow directions. Those are all social emotional learning skills.
But would put that student in a different program, I guess, is what I'm saying? Because, I mean, if this is a new program, or is it just going to be?
No.
It's just
So
differently.
It's a continuum.
Okay.
Okay, because we have everything from some pretty highly skilled special educators who work with classroom teachers, to programs, to behavior interventionists that come in and work with students within the classroom, but we're contracting for those services, to students who are placed in out-of-district therapeutic day programs. So it's a continuum, and so our mission is to be able to bring this into our schools so that we're not relying on those contracts, we're doing the work ourselves.
Are you wondering about least restrictive environment? Like, what is the criteria for getting a kid into
So
whatever
I think-
program they
Sorry,
need?
so I'm gonna stop it here. I think we.
Yeah, well, I could
think
talk
if
about this all night, just like Matt, so.
Yeah, maybe this
You
needs to be an
still speak as fast
agenda
as
item
this.
for a future meeting.
Great. Yeah.
But we're off the topic of the 5-year plan now, so. Anything else on the 5-year plan?
Yeah, I just asking for your indulgence, just to remind me that the transportation study was just focused on compliance with state rules, or did we look at the future? Because there is only one bus company around that's able to take care of us, and there was some talk of maybe looking at purchasing or leasing our own buses and going back to that method. And was that part of the plan, or because that
So that would be something we would consider in the future, or?
We are looking at that. Dave Kimmel has actually been charged in the feasibility of owning your own buses. And he's doing a proposal study for us on that. And I think we suggested he would try to get back to us by February or so.
So is he gonna weigh that against the obvious market situation where there's not?
Oh, yeah, that's all gonna be part of it.
More than one bus.
I have to tell you, Martha and I are skeptical.
Yeah.
We actually think in the perfect world it could save us some money, but everything we're being told by people who own
It's not a
is
perfect
if they had
world.
their druthers, they'd get out of it in a second.
So what
Because
do
they
we?
can't find drivers, they can't.
Well, I understand all the problems from the past at Fairfield, but what happens if Grand Avenue goes belly up? What if they just go out of business because they want to retire? There's the one company that bid on our RFP. I think there should be some kind of, and then we're gonna have other companies come in and just offer to do particular schools and do whatever they want. I mean, that was the problem we had with them before. So I just don't know where to take this.
I think you have to
We're
let-
working on it.
You have to let us, let Dave do the study. We're gonna be going through a process to see what it is. Maybe I'm gonna be proven wrong and Martha's gonna be proven wrong, but let's see. When
Yeah.
it comes,
I would just wonder if we should include an analysis of the company. How much debt they're in, how much cash, whatever their public records are they publicly held?
Well, I think just the fact that we got a sole source provider tells us we're at risk.
It does,
You know,
but.
and that's
But
something
if
that
you're
needs to be
weighing
looked
that
at.
sole source provider against the cost of doing it on our own, you should kind of know where that company's heading.
I agree, and I think risk has some costs too, so.
Yes.
I agree with you. I've kind of been championing the thought of buying our own buses ever since the last contract.
We'll hire you to do the management of it. It'll work. You gotta find somebody to do that, though.
Anything else on the 5-year plan? The only thing I would add is I think this is a really great tool. It's kind of like, you've got it laid out like a project, and it's a good snapshot of our first 5 years. The first question that comes to mind to me, though, when I see it is, aren't the 2 columns missing? I mean, shouldn't we always be looking 5 years out into the future for a 5-year plan, rather than in 2 years, are we gonna be like, okay, we're done? And we're not. We know we're not. So I'm just wondering whether we ought to be looking at 5 years out in the future all the time.
Agreed.
So, just a suggestion.
Yep.
But this is great. It's really good historical, and it shows a lot of stuff that's been accomplished, and you and your team have really done a great job on this, I think.
And thank you for the large size too. It was a little hard to read.
Is this the
Yeah,
one?
particularly with the colors, the figure ground, dark blue and black. It's very hard for me to read, especially when it's mini print. But this is good.
Okay. Anything else on the 5-year plan?
I'd just like to check down what you're saying. I think it's actually, both of you alluded to it, it may be time within the next year to look at extending it out. Because we're at, 2 years of the 2.5. And so it'd be a good time to put the committee in.
Yep.
Look at that.
Okay. Moving forward, 7B, staff issues. B1 is a request from Ms. Bittner to waive the resignation penalty on her contract. If we can.
I'll make the motion to waive that penalty.
Okay, do I have a second?
I second.
Okay. As far as the discussion goes, I know we all know the circumstances, so I'd like to keep it out of executive session if we can. If someone feels like they want to talk about it, then we can move to that, but otherwise, we can maybe just vote. Does anyone feel like they want to discuss it, or the circumstances being it? Thank you. Okay, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? 9-0, it's carried. Item B2, employee concerns. This certainly belongs in executive session because it deals with evaluation of employees, so we will move it to there, and we don't need a finding for that. Brings us to 8A, new business, capital reserve priorities, attachment 8A.
So Martha and I are gonna tag team on this. Martha will start.
So, like our five-year plan, this is a working document. This is first draft for the board to review. Basically, what we have done is, as an administrative team, we've gone out and looked at the different areas in the schools that need attention. And I've been compiling information from the different administrations from the different schools and the facilities managers over the last couple of months. And so basically, what you have in front of you is items that we feel we will be bringing forward to the board within the next 3 to 5 years for approval to use capital reserve funds for. The first two items at the top, the board has already authorized the use of funds, and that's the district share of the safety grants that we got through the state and funding the 2 studies at the Fairfield Center School. And then the rest of the page, I've broken it out kind of by school buildings and the different projects with estimated costs that we've associated with these different projects. And as I said, as a project comes to fruition and comes to the point where we're ready to move forward with it, we would be bringing it to the board for authorization at that point. But just so you can kind of get a sense of all the different areas that we are looking at and what we intend to focus our attention on. We can go down through each one, or you can just look at it for reference. That's the above the line. Those are the projects, like I said, that we anticipate within the next 3 to 5 years. We currently have an estimated capital reserve fund, I say estimated because I haven't got the final audit figure yet, of about $2.9 million that we're holding right now. These projects estimated come into about $1.5 million worth, which hopefully over the years we use some capital reserve funds, and if we have good years, hopefully we will be adding money back into the capital reserve at the end of the year. So we don't anticipate to deplete this whole pot all in one fell swoop. Below the line is another project that we've been looking at, and I don't know if Kevin wants to speak to this, but it's basically health and safety issues up at the high school, and these are things that we've been talking about for a few years now. There's some north building improvements, which is the original hospital building. There's quite a few issues there. There's the bricking on the outside of the building is falling off of the building. So there's issues there. We are looking to put a link between the 2 campuses for security and safety reasons. And once we do that, we actually are touching some of the buildings, some of the existing buildings, which means we then have to go in and follow some code issues. We have to sprinkle some of the buildings. We're also needing to replace some transformers that we have here that are located inside, right, Chris? They're inside the building, and we need to take them outside of the building and put them outside. So that's another piece of this project. Yep. So those were.
Stop that link a foot short, you wouldn't have to.
Yeah. So.
Good thing.
We've come to an estimated figure with the help from the architect service, Arnold and Skangus, there we go, for about a $5.2 million project. We anticipate that this would possibly be a bond issue, because this is no way, we can't cover this with our capital reserve funds. And we do have other issues in all of our other buildings that also need attention. So this is kind of what we're working on and what we said we would bring forward, so you would understand what we've been looking at for projects.
So,
Looks good.
so just to point out, on the capital reserve part of it,
Mhm.
even if we budget to the nickel for the next few years, and we don't do anything to replenish that fund, these projects will take about half of what's in there, and we
Yes.
still have half of it back.
Yes.
My second question would be, if we're going to go out for a bond,
Mhm.
are we looking far enough out? I mean, I'd hate to go out for a bond and then in a year and a half say, oh, you know what, we need this too. Have we looked?
I think I can answer that. And that's a great question. If you recall, it was a year ago or so that we talked about the fact that we had the architect look at code issues, safety issues, the connector, and everything else. And at the time, if he looked at something that was around $25 million. And interestingly, half of that was correcting code problems, which I get real frustrated with. And I thought $13 million or so, and we wouldn't, you put the $13 million in, and you, from the outside, you wouldn't even know that anything happened.
Yeah.
What you see here is the major issues that the architect feels the regulators would want to have done if we were to make any changes to buildings. Sprinkler, because there's no sprinkler in the south building. There's no sprinkler. The transformer.
Mhm.
Could more be done? You're right. And we'll talk more about this when we do the presentation, Jim, but this is a bare minimum number. And could we go higher? We could go higher easily and justify it.
I think Jim might have been talking about other schools too.
I am.
Like,
Oh, if you're talking of the other
like
schools,
the
we
age
have,
of
I'm
State
sorry.
Tech, I would think it's at that point where it's gonna need HVAC and, you know, all kinds of things like
We-
that. So I'm surprised they're not on here at all.
That was we've had significant discussions with all our administrators, and what you see is what our administrators feel is going to be needed for the.
Yeah, I certainly am not pushing to raise this number, but I do want to avoid 2 years from now, like I said, coming back and say, you know, we knew this was going to happen, but.
Yeah, and we do have 5-year capital plans for some of our buildings where we have mapped out over the next 5 years, these are the different projects we're gonna do. Some of it with capital reserve funds, some of it with budget funds as we move forward. And we are chunking those out so that we can either fit them in the capital reserve over a few years or through the budget process. The larger pieces, like putting a connection between the two high school buildings, is something that we can't physically do in a budget and or capital reserve fund. Just to clarify too, this, the building link we've got here, the $26 million project that we were looking at a few years back, included a multi-story
Yes.
classroom space in that connector. It was almost a whole new building in itself. This is basically a hallway between the two buildings, a brick hallway. Looks very nice in the drawings, but it doesn't add classroom space, it doesn't add administrative office spaces. It's just a hallway.
And it would be what I find neat, again, we're gonna talk more about this next month.
Right.
But what I find a huge priority to us is safety and all those doors in BFA. That would be the one and only entrance.
It would be the main entrance.
That would be the main
connector?
entrance.
Yeah.
You would have somebody right in there.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
That's the major reason we look at it is from a safety point of view, from different points. But
I agree with that.
They'd have to come to the middle
Yep.
to enter, so they'd be walking around the building to get to the front entrance, or to the entrance.
In the exterior of the building.
They would be in the exterior of the building, yeah.
The buses would still be dropping off at different areas.
That's where the buses are gonna be
would looping into the front, the buses. there would still be some entrances on by the parking lots where staff would come in, but they would be, like right now, they're locked during the day. But the issue is the students having to go back and forth between the buildings during the school day. That's the major issue, really.
Is an architect designed this yet, or?
Yeah.
So
We've got some preliminary
did you
drawings.
figure in volume of kids at any one time? I mean, that's
He's an
something-
architect, yes.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a fair question, because sometimes something like that would get overlooked, because we get more kids. I don't think we will, but
Yeah.
I think we will.
But like Kevin said, we will be doing a presentation on that
I mean,
project
I would just
itself.
imagine we'd over-engineer that a little bit,
I would-
just, you know.
Yeah.
When you do that presentation, be very interested in tax impacts.
Oh, that
Things
would
like-
definitely be part of that
Remember the old days
presentation.
with the
Oh, yes.
QZABs?
Yeah.
Or remember the
QZABs and the
QZABs?
QSCABs,
Yeah,
yeah.
let's get some of those again if we can.
They don't have them anymore.
Yeah, of course they don't.
Of course not.
That's an old time
Yes.
funding, before you-
They were federal loan programs where you had very little interest.
Yeah, it was like free
No
money.
more.
Including
No
free
more.
software.
You don't get those anymore.
That's right, they did throw in free software, you're right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So this is just an overview of, there was some question as to what are we planning on as far as our capital reserve and projects. So this is just a way to kind of give you a
This is really helpful. Thank
overview
you
of
for
what we're
doing
looking at. And again, like I said, it's a working document, so there's, next year, there's gonna be things that are gonna be added to this that aren't on here now. Yep, okay.
So Jim, from your comment earlier, there's about 3 million in the
Capital.
capital fund.
Yep.
It's at the top of the page.
That's the number at the top.
2.966.
I round it up. I always do, I round it up.
I did pretty good for not even reading that.
Times two.
Quick question, the project's above the line, I guess, is that in priority, the project in priority?
No,
or
no, they're not in priority order.
Is that gonna be something in the discussion of what's gonna go first, second, third?
Well, Kevin
I mean,
can
I'm just-
correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that that's our work
Okay.
as to what needs to be done first, and we'll bring those projects to you for approval.
Well, yeah, it's certainly not our job, but it would be nice to have a timeline, for instance.
Anticipated fiscal year or something.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, it's, we're still working on trying to figure out, what are the projects, and so we're compiling them.
The town
And
school doesn't have any current needs?
currently, they don't, and when the town school had bond payments in their budget, they had a large bond payment each year, and the year that the bond payment discontinued, when we were budgeting, we put that same amount into a building improvement expense account, and we've maintained that, and so they have a fairly good cushion in that part of the budget that they are able to maintain.
So they
and-
have money that's budgeted for their needs, that's
Yes.
why it's not coming out of
That's why it's
capital.
not coming out of capital.
Okay, good enough.
And the
Yeah.
more we can do that, the better.
Yeah.
Not to bond.
Right.
Yep. Any other questions on that?
I'm just confused how you separate the budget between SATEC's fund and the rest of the district.
I don't think they do, I think they just kept that money in the overall budget.
Yes.
Because we don't separate the schools.
So we just set it aside for that reason. Okay, thank you.
But they're not continuing to do that, or they are.
They are. Yes, we're continuing to do that.
So do all the taxpayers pay for that, or just,
Yeah.
It's one budget,
so,
just like all the taxpayers are paying for this work too, because
Right.
the money comes from the capital reserve, which the capital reserve is surpluses from the budgets.
so we continue to put a little aside extra for just say tech?
Each year, what I've been doing since that instance with the town school is all of the schools that have bonds, as the bond payments are being paid off, I shift those funds into the building improvements accounts. So we do have some funds in the budget to do some building
But
improvements,
it
yes.
doesn't have to go to SATEC, it's
No.
not earmarked for SATEC, it's part of the
Right.
Maple Run budget.
Correct.
You just identifying SATEC because that was the bond that was retired,
Right.
and it's not coming out of capital
Correct.
reserve. So
Yes.
it's all coming out of the same pot,
It's all
right?
coming out of the same pot.
And, but reserved for SATEC or not necessarily?
No.
Not necessarily.
It's just why they're not showing up on the list.
Right.
Anything else?
That brings us to
You know, can I just make, I just want to say something. So I think we need to understand that better at some other points, what that all means. Just because, you just said, what you said actually contradicted what I heard, because it is all one big budget, and it isn't necessarily earmarked for SATEC, but yet, I'm kind of hearing it is. Well, because they don't have a designated, part in this. You follow me?
But it's money that she has been putting towards capital improvements, although it's not part of the capital reserve.
Right, but capital reserve has a definition and a money source, right? We know how you get money in a capital reserve. Whereas this was like a special accounting that they did. I think it's a great idea, and wouldn't it be great if we all had one? Yeah,
We do, it's the same one.
I understand, but you know what I'm saying? I just want to understand it. We don't have to do it right now. Just some other time.
But I just heard a really dirty word that I just want to clarify. It's not a slush fund.
Well, no.
No, it's not.
It's nowhere near a slush fund. It's money that was put in for a specific purchase under a certain line item called building improvements. And that is used for that. And now it's in a Maple Run budget that's for building improvements, which you don't always see every little thing that's happening there because we're building improving, and that's why we don't have it under capital expenses. And while Martha talked about the fact that SATEC had done that, they did, but now that money is melded into a bigger budget. So whether it's used at SATEC, or city, or Fairfield, is somewhat immaterial, the money's there.
So maybe just, if it makes things simpler, could we just roll it into the capital reserve fund and then put SATEC on the list?
You can't do that.
You can't
after
do
the
that,
year.
because that's budget money. This is not budget money. This is capital reserve fund.
If you don't spend it,
You
then
don't
you can roll it into the capital reserve at the end of the year.
Except that the town has, even though it's, there are projects that already in, like these are delimited where we think we're gonna do this project this year, this project this year, this project this year for these buildings. Town has got that same thing with the budget money. So it's all.
It seems like that slate should have been erased and that whole plan should have gone into Maple Run. Now, maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Go ahead, Jack.
I just think we need to be careful as we move from individual school districts and a supervisory union to Maple Run, that in our language, we're going to at times kind of make throwback mistakes or throwback errors in the way we communicate because of our history. But I think on your own family budget, you might say, this truck needs new tires next year. The car will wait, till the summer or whatever. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about is we've stopped paying on this bond that the school had. But in the future, we'll be talking about bonds that cover all the schools. And as we transition, we just don't need to cloud it a little bit by, say we're going to reserve this money for this particular school or whatever, because that just sounds like we're going back, to the old way. And I know that wasn't intentional, but we need to.
It did sound like you were saying that, Mark, that SATEC didn't have any things on here, even though they're 30 years old, I believe. because they've already got projects planned that they're paying for out of the budget. And that does seem to be different than what we would expect, if that's true.
Jim, Angela, can you wait till I just point this out? Jim alluded to this, that this is what I've always understood, that what we don't spend in a budget in a year has to go to capital reserve.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how is this
It
protected?
doesn't have to, actually, we have to
We-
vote to move
right,
it into
it has to be
capital
voted
reserve.
to
So what happens
capital
to it,
reserve.
what happens to it if it doesn't go to capital reserve?
If the voters don't approve for it to go into capital reserve, the future budget, it needs to go to reduce a future
Reduce the
budget.
next one, yeah.
Okay, so how's that work with setting aside money?
We've done that both ways, right?
We have to bring to the voters each year for them to authorize that at the end of the previous year, the surplus can go into a capital reserve.
Yeah.
If they vote that down, that money from that particular year has to go to a future budget to reduce the budget. It can't go into the capital reserve. It isn't gonna affect the funds that are already in the capital
I
reserve.
understand that, but I just don't see how you get around it by putting money aside for future projects that extend more than a budget year.
No, that's not what I said. There is money in the budget, and they have a capital plan, like all of our buildings have capital plans as to what needs to be done in what years. It's just in that budget year, these are the projects that they're gonna accomplish.
So, I'm a little confused, as you can tell. So, going forward, SATEC, as part of the big budget, SATEC's gonna continue to request funds to pay for those ongoing projects as part of the budget.
Possibly.
But any school can do that.
I'm just not seeing how you separate it from a budget that you can keep it from one year to another when, for so long.
We're not keeping anything.
You're not keeping money from year to year?
No.
For SATEC in the past?
I don't think anybody's accusing anybody.
No, I'm not.
I think we're just trying to
I just
understand
want to
it.
explain, because since I've been at SATEC, we have a fantastic facility manager, and I work closely with him. We have every year, we revise and develop a 4 to 6 year building project plan. We have very specific things that we try to do so that we don't have to defer maintenance. Our goal was, once we had, and I think, Steve, I know you were, in the district then with children in the school, we had some pretty significant large bond payments that we were paying. And what we did, each time we paid it down a little, we took a very small amount of it and we put it in the budget. So the tax rate would go down, but we saved some of it each time. And the idea was that, so SATEC, this building, would not have to come to the taxpayers ever and say, hey, we need this huge bond. So we have a very specific plan to upkeep that building. We just redid it. It goes up to 2024. And I actually shared it with the admin team because Kevin had seen it and said that, look, it's very detailed and well developed, but it's going to prevent, it's trying to be very thinking ahead and very planning. And so that's what we did, because we had those huge bond payments. And so we just took a little bit each time we paid it down, and it's in our O&M budget. So we have money in the O&M budget to pay for that. It would be any different than, BFA has a really big athletic budget. Well, that's for their stuff. They have it in their budget and they have it there. I'm not asking for it for, or the music budget, and they have a lot bigger budget than my music budget.
But that's all part of the same budget. It's all part of the yearly budget. They put in what they need for the year.
That's what we did in
So
O&M.
you're clarifying this as you didn't have anything left over. What was left over was put in the capital reserve fund for your school.
No.
And what was,
No.
and you
No.
charged the budget.
Mike, every single building, one thing I require is that every single building, as you would ask me to do,
It's like a department building.
says,
Department.
gives us a 5-year, somewhat of a 5-year plan about how, of things they need to do maintenance-wise, operations and maintenance-wise. Sean will tell you the next year he's got another floor he's gonna do.
Yeah.
We know that because it's part of a plan. And so we know that that's gonna get done. Chris will tell you that he's got some major doors he needs to get fixed into place in successive years. He's gonna do that, we're gonna do it out of our Maple Run budget. That all the buildings have a plan in place. It's not a capital reserve plan, it's what they've got in their operations and maintenance. And so we know, because Angela's already done her plan too, and we know that she's been able to take care of her operations and maintenance. She's been able to take care of it within the Maple Run budget. We've got it planned, so there's no need for any capital expense because we've been able to take care of it within the major budget.
Okay, so there's no carryover from year to year?
No,
Thank
no,
you.
there is no
Well,
carryover.
Martha, come on, it sounded like you had a
I'm
separate
sorry.
account for SATEC. I mean, I think it's something that needs to be clarified. We are one district now, and I get what Kevin's saying, but, you know, what I was hearing is that there's separate money set aside, and for years you have told me, we can't do that.
I'm sorry if that's what you heard. What I meant was, they have money in their operations and maintenance budget to do some ongoing projects.
In their
It's
line
in
item.
their budget, in
In their line
their
item.
line
That's
item
what budget.
budget.
Than any other
They don't have a
school.
budget.
It's no different than all the other schools. They all have operation maintenance budgets, and they have building improvements in their budgets.
So
I
it
think
sounds like
this is-
SATEC doesn't have any big, huge projects coming up.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because
so that's all I need
they're
to know.
maintaining,
We've
because,
been keeping up
Right.
with it.
right,
I think that's part of it, is we have numbers for the other schools, we don't have numbers for her.
right.
The other thing is, I think this is kind of like a consolidation pain. You know,
Yes.
and it's like Jack was talking about earlier, I think what's given the board the most heartburn is the lack of consistency in how these schools are being handled versus SATEC. So we need to figure out how to do this as one Maple Run district. And maybe we are, maybe I'm reading it
Well,
wrong.
I think you are reading it wrong. I just
Okay.
told you.
You are.
There's a big budget for O&M. We just kind of know how that's being spent, and we're taking care of it. So what you're seeing here is.
So if what you're saying here is that SATEC doesn't have any projects that would match up to these dollar amounts?
Correct.
Okay, so they don't have anything that's like $30,000?
Yeah, we do.
They do,
It's in the budget.
So it's not consistent.
but
That's
Yeah,
what I'm
that's,
saying.
I agree.
It's not consistent.
Because you could create an example, if there was something on here that's like $30,000, okay? You could say, well, I want this item to be covered by that, because I want to remove flooring for the asbestos abatement off the bond vote.
Yeah, why didn't Leanne just
You
put
know,
that into her
why,
budget?
why didn't that leave there? Why isn't one of the, greater than $30,000 items on the SATEC budget moved to here so that, we're talking about, you want to make sure that the bond vote is healthy enough to cover what we need done. So, I think that some of this is semantics, and I think that, Martha, you kind of led us down a path that maybe, and I kind of bit, so, I understand how this all happened, but I don't think anybody's got any, malintent or anything.
Right.
I think we're just trying to understand.
Oh, I never suggested that, I just.
But, the idea is you could shovel these things around, and it could be like this, so the items would be different, and there would be a SATEC item on this list.
Because the truth of the matter is, if that money's put in the budget for SATEC's improvements, Kevin could make a decision to move it over to
absolutely.
the tech center.
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's his prerogative.
And we could,
So-
and you could go out for a bigger bond vote too, if you move those items into this list. I mean, I'm not suggesting we do that, I'm just pointing out the fact that all these are kind of interchangeable.
Oh, it definitely is interchangeable. My goal and the goal of all of us is that everybody's needs are met.
Right.
Whether they're met through an
Through the
O&M budget
budget
or
or through the capital reserve.
that the needs are met.
Right.
And I think if you go out and you ask somebody, are you not being supported in your building, I think you'll hear, no, we're being supported.
Yeah.
We're all looking at the big picture, and we're making sure needs are met, whether it be through capital expenses, capital reserve, or through the main budget.
And I hear that, and that's all good, but I think we need to move to be consistent. Otherwise, the perception is there that schools are being treated differently, and it's like, why? So I think as we move forward, we got to figure out how to do this the same for all the schools.
Well, aren't we anyway, because every school has to submit their own letter each year, so how are we treating each school differently if they're submitting this for the budget, and we've gone over that? like SATEC may have something 4 to 6 years out, Saks may have a different claim that may not have a $30,000 tag, but I thought these
If it's in their
projects-
budgets, Nina, we wouldn't even see it.
Right.
Because we just see the one number for Maple Run. So we wouldn't even, we know about these because they're coming out of capital reserves, and we're gonna have to approve them.
And the budget isn't broken down by schools. I always see them.
No, but we have to have get an idea of some number, right, to put in the budget, right?
So who's we? Are you talking about the board? Because the board would never know. Martha would know.
Yeah, she has to have a number then. So she's got to collect that information, but she's got to see, get the numbers per project. Doesn't she to put in, and it has to, and it gets to be a total number, but she's got to have some sort of breakdown to see where that number has to go for each project, regardless of what school.
I just think it's important for me, especially as someone new on the board, that I have a really clear understanding, because people are coming to me asking, Susan, what is going on? I don't really know.
And
I think it's really important.
But I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah, I think it's, and based on this discussion, I think it's really important that all of us have a really good understanding. And I agree, Jim, that there needs to be consistency. It's much better to, it's just easier to explain to people.
Yeah.
That's what we need to be able to do.
I mean, I think Jack nailed it, really. It's
Yeah.
It's like an old
Well,
habit.
I've got to clarify. I've been in this business 48 years. And I'm trying to stay out of it. But I keep getting asked to do things. Anyway.
Why are you here then?
No, I mean in terms of employment.
Okay.
But I've worked in large school systems in Delaware where it was the other extreme, where there was a capital improvement thing for 10 schools. And they might do 5 roofs at a time or 6 parking lots at a time and that kind of thing. And then I came to Vermont, and Franklin Northwest, and Highgate had a budget, and Sheldon had a budget, and it was all individual, and they would compete against each other and everything else. However, I have never worked in a place, in all the schools and school systems, these folks here do an absolutely unbelievable job, and I can compare it. So in no way was my statement meant to be critical or anything. It's just, I think all of us need to be careful that we don't put out, especially on TV, that we're thinking of individual schools or something and we're now the main Maple Run. So I think the way it will work, knowing Kevin and knowing all of you, that the money is consolidated. It's the Maple Run budget and whatever, but there are times when you think of different projects for different schools, but it all comes out of the Maple Run budget, and that's kind of where it is. I just think in our verbal discussions, we need to be careful we don't go back to making it appear that we're thinking of an individual school budget, when we're really, it's the Maple Run budget. That was the only point I was
I
trying
think a good way to demonstrate that would be to have a SATEC item on this list.
Yeah. Well, I think this was a healthy discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not
We will
intended to be
move, we
critical
will
of
move some of
anyone.
SADEX projects out of the budget, put them here, and then shift the budget money around so that
Yeah,
we've got it
somehow,
covered.
I mean, maybe the capital improvement fund is made up of the capital reserve fund plus some O&M line item or style.
Well,
I don't know the rules, so.
if the money doesn't get spent out of the budget, it'll end up in capital
Right.
reserve.
Right.
So you can move some, I think Bill was right, I think you should put a SATEC item in here. All right.
And clearly, there's no hidden.
Did you say that louder, please, so that the camera?
I got it.
It's as loud as I can.
Nobody's being deprived secretly.
Nobody is being deprived. It's either gonna be done through the budget, or it's gonna be done through capital reserve,
Right.
which all of it is all Maple Run money. So, yes.
Well, that was fun.
And Martha she is magical with her magic 8 ball. She always knows. She
Magic
knows
math.
things so well.
Magic math. Okay. Can we move on? Is it okay if I move on?
You're on again.
Please.
Sure,
Now
sorry.
All right, item 8C is negotiations update. I think there will be at least a little bit of discussion on strategy on this maybe, so I think we need a finding to move this into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Alan, you know?
Any discussion on moving into executive session?
Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions, 9-0, that goes to executive session as well.
Did you skip budget, Jim, or?